Welcome to the Wise Women Podcast and our debut season, Wisdom's Discovery, Finding Your Center at the Edge. Because some moments in life call us to our edge and then beckon us to expand beyond it. In this season, we dive into the shared experiences of 20 remarkable women. And through honest conversation, we explore together the moments that shape us, stretch us, undo us, and ultimately return us to ourselves. I'm Katherine Jelinek, and this is the Wise Women Podcast. Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to get to introduce you to Jennifer Deroin. She is a certified EOS implementer and here to share her story that I can already relate to so much and look forward to hearing in full. Thanks for being here, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me.
So where does your story begin?
I'm going to start with my story, the framing and the reflection beginning about 2 months ago. Okay, so I had a really great conversation with a fellow EOS implementer. We had just come back from our annual, and I was lamenting once again about some frustration I was feeling with a client who was not getting the results that I had hoped they would get. And after a discussion with her and explaining the process that we'd been down, where they were at, and why I just didn't think it was going to work, she called me up later and said, "I'd like to give you some feedback and an observation. Are you open to that?" Which, of course, yes, I am. And so she shared this quote with me after having a conversation. And so I'm going to read it to you as she shared it with me. "Resentment is a signal that a boundary is being crossed or a need is not being met. Guilt is the flip side of resentment. Choose to set the boundary and be prepared to feel some guilt and work through that. And then ask yourself, how can I work through this resentment and give myself permission to release the guilt?" So during that conversation, one of the things that I had shared with her is an awareness of my personality profile. So I'm a fan of all psychographic assessments. I think they all give us a little bit of a nugget into terms of who we are. The one I probably have the most experience with in terms of duration and exposure to is the DISC, which is pretty commonly known. And I've taken it multiple times. And every time I've taken it, my I, which stands for influence, is a 100, right? On a scale of 0 to 100.
Wow.
So we're going to call that high. And the attributes that you commonly find with a high I, it's a person that is good at engaging people, bringing them along, galvanizing them around ideas, etc. The flip side of that is a high I places a lot of value on themselves about what other people think about them and their appreciation. The other common attribute to a high I is optimism. So when you're a 100 on the scale of 0 to 100, that can become a blind spot. And so the story that I realize I tell myself is, I can fix this. I'll be able to solve this, whatever it is, right? There's this belief that I'm able to overcome whatever the situation is. So she and I had this great conversation, and to put it in the framing of this work that I was doing with a client that I ultimately decided to release. I think the important reflection was taking that same information and applying it through significant points in my life and watching this pattern emerge. You talked about what was this point of wisdom. So I was 53 years old and 7 months. Hey, girlfriend, here's this pattern that it continues to show up for you. And it sounds like I need to maybe stay in this not great situation because I'm too afraid of what others are going to think about me. So I'm placing the importance of that. What will they think of me? Or will I have failed? Or what will the world label me as if I didn't do what I thought they needed me to do or wanted me to do? And so I'm sacrificing basically my own boundaries, right? For the sake of worrying about what other people will think about me. And so when I reflected back, I thought about the first significant moment where that occurred in my life, and that was in my first marriage. I was 19 when I married my high school sweetheart. He had been my one and only everything from the age when I was 14.
Wow.
And he's a great guy. I'm not here to badmouth him. I refer to him as my husband because I don't like the name ex-husband. And so he's a good guy, just wasn't the right guy for me. About year 3 into the marriage, I realized this isn't working for me. But I hung on for 10 more years because I was so afraid of what the world would think about me for making a decision to leave my husband, right, and the father of my kids.
Mm,
Boundaries were being crossed, and I felt like a pretty small person. By the time I finally worked up the courage to do something different, but I was really letting my decision being guided by fear of judgment, if that makes sense. And so that was a big, I think, pause looking back at that. And then fast forward, I'd had a long banking career, and then I was approached by a gentleman who owned a public accounting firm. And he said, Jennifer, will you come help us grow this firm? Here's what we want to do. And I joined them and we went to work on that. And then he retired and I took over the daily operations. So I'm not an accountant, right? Trying to manage this firm. And that's where I first was exposed to EOS. And
interesting.
yeah,
They
yeah,
have EOS there.
yeah.
And that's
Yeah, we implemented it there. And that was my first exposure to that. But what was happening there, and again, I, have respect for, that group of people and everything that they had there. But what I realized at some point in time, there was a set of unspoken values that not only did I not completely align with, but some of those were in violation of my own values. And again, the story of I can fix this, I can make it better. And I had placed a lot of my self-worth on this person that I was at the firm, sitting in the integrator seat, running the day-to-day of the business, and just placed a lot of my own value on quote unquote that label, so to speak. But my boundaries were being crossed and needs were being unmet. Resentment, anger, frustration is growing. And I continued to let that go on for way too long because again, worry about what will people think? Who am I in the world if I'm not this? And by the time I left, I was not in a good mental place. Once again, I had allowed that concern over other people valuing me as a certain thing in the world to compromise what I really needed. Just in that single conversation with her, right, I was able to kind of step back and look at this through this lens and this filter and ask myself, what are you going to do differently? And so through that clarity break, took the steps to ask, what should I do when I begin to see the warning indicators of resentment, which can feel like anger, exasperation, things like that. And what am I going to do differently in placing my worth and my happiness not on others' opinions, but rather what I need and living in honesty.
mm.
And that means kindness and integrity. And that is the worth that I need to bring.
Wow. Yes. Good and very deep in how it bridges like different elements from the work to like very significant relationships and everything. Can you, when you're dropping us into those moments with those two examples, the one being the accounting firm and the other being leaving your first husband, like the emotional moment you got brought to, were those a similar flavor of feeling or were they different? Because I think the thought you brought up or the pattern is resentment, but how did that show up? Like when you said you were with the accounting firm kind of brought to what was the language you used? It was the hard mental place, I think. Like what were you actually feeling then? And then I'm just curious if it was similar or if there were different nuances to the feelings that you had at that point where you realized there was a conclusion coming with your first marriage?
Good question. I think in all instances, when I think about the three, right, the marriage, the firm, and letting go of a client that was a wrong fit, I think I would express the emotion as honestly exasperation around the symptoms. The thing that, and here was my blind spot, keep trying to fix all of these symptoms, but what I wasn't doing was really getting to the root cause of the issue, which is this isn't a fit. And so I guess I'm trying to think of what was maybe that common thread. I would probably label it as exasperation. The difference, I think, in my first experience leaving the marriage versus the firm, anytime you leave a situation that ended differently than you had once dreamed, you go through the grief cycle. And so I watched myself do that during my marriage. So I think here's the difference is, it's you're living in shock, anger, and blame. Then you go to sadness and then you come to acceptance. So the difference in my marriage is I had processed the grief cycle all the way through acceptance. So by the time I came to the end, I was actually pretty calm and I was in an okay place because I had gotten to acceptance.
So you brought it to him after you had already gotten to acceptance.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was there, right? The difference with the firm, I was not there. I had walked through, I think, and got shock, anger, blame, right? And really, when I left, I lived in sadness for a pretty long period of time as I was still going through that grief cycle and then got to acceptance. And I think it was me. I just needed that time to process things, to let go of it, whatever it was. So that's a great question. And I had to stop and think about the similarities and the differences. And the difference was I wasn't through the grief cycle.
But that's actually in and of itself a very useful observation that when you go through a situation, and a variety of them could count, you will go through the grief cycle if it turns out there's a breakage and it doesn't end up the way you once dreamed. That is so, like, that by itself is very, like, I process and pocket that one.
Yeah. Yeah. And so many people go through that and they don't recognize it as that, and they're suffering silently, which is exactly what I was doing. Even though when I left the firm, my brain knew rationally, you need to do this. It makes sense. But the emotional processing of that continued on for a long period of time. And it's confusing because your brain, it's right, but you're emotionally still processing it. And so you have this conflicting pieces of information, so to speak. And it's interesting. I now coach other EOS implementers. And a couple of weeks ago, I was on the phone with a gentleman he started off the conversation with, well, I'm kind of feeling these emotions. And then he immediately goes into all of the tactical things that he's doing to build this practice. And we just go back to that emotion statement and can you tell me more? And essentially he's going through the same thing. It's the loss of something that he thought was going to end differently in his prior career. And he's now transitioning, same thing. He understands rationally it's right, but he is in that grief cycle. And just being able to say that, and so people understand, okay, I'm not crazy, I'm not alone, because I remember feeling like I was just white knuckling it to hang on. So on the outside, I'm happy, shiny, I'm an EOS implementer. But on my inside, I was still processing that. And it just felt like I was kind of hanging on quietly.
Wow, good stuff. Okay. And then resentment, boundaries, and guilt. How about, have you ever experienced, or I'm sure probably yes, but the question is like to what magnitude and when, where you got out of something early, maybe set that boundary and experienced guilt instead of resentment? Have you ever experienced the other side of this yet?
The other side of it, probably in a small example. I was having a conversation with somebody here just recently, and we had probably a difference of opinion around a what would I call it, maybe a sensitive subject. And old Jennifer might have just gone along with them because I didn't want to hurt their feelings, or I didn't want them to see me as, this bad person or wrong or whatever it is, And I had just been working through the processing of some of this information. And so here we're sitting there at coffee and this conversation comes up and she just really outright asked me my opinion on something. And I thought, well, here we go. And I just walked through it with her, wanting and during the process trying to remain respectful to her, but stating a different opinion and honoring my own boundaries and she's asking me, maybe would you be interested in doing this or would you be interested in doing that? And the answer being no, and me being okay with that, right? So I think I had observed myself during that conversation doing that. Even though it's something super small, I was recognizing it in the moment, I guess.
Okay, so I'm just going to kind of celebrate that because it's important to acknowledge the moments we do show up differently, right? Did you experience the guilt after that or during it?
I didn't, honestly. I didn't feel guilt on the other side. Yeah, I felt okay because I was honest and respectful. Right, to her in that process. I felt like we both walked away from that conversation feeling really good. And we had some things that we agreed on, but there were some areas that, when she first asked me, I thought, ooh, this is kind of a sensitive, scary topic, but here we go. And so, yeah, I didn't feel guilt on the other side of it. And honestly, here's another example. After I had talked with Kristen, my friend who gave me, this great feedback, I called up this client and I said to them at the beginning, no, I love you. Right. Here's my observation. I don't think we should continue. And on the other side of that, I felt only peace and not guilt because I guess it's that same thread, and I hadn't really processed that till you said that to me. I was honest and respectful to him in that conversation. And so
Mhm.
I felt okay about it on the other side. And so I didn't feel that guilt. But I think the reason why she knew that would be important for me is because I talked about this personality, my tendencies, but also it's this feeling of, well, if I didn't get you where you wanted to go, did I fail? Did I, it's this feeling of I let you down. And so just working through those feelings, I think beforehand, then when I had the conversation, on the other side of the conversation was release and peace. So
Hmm. And what was their response?
very positive, and they understood and they agreed, and we just wish each other the best. And and I told him I'm always here for you if you need to talk. And so I wanted to remain friends. That was important to me, that we could keep that connection and not have negativity, out there. That's something I try to not, I try to feel like I want to not have negative karma in the world. And so I felt really good on the other side of that. And he did too.
And also, just to bring those two pieces together, the friend that you sat down with, you also maintained the friendship and both walked away from that conversation feeling good. I hear that. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting here, because I think that you're giving us a third option
Yeah.
beyond resentment and guilt.
Right.
And it's not that I think if I'm processing this for myself as well, there's human grace to realize we may not, listener may not always nail that middle ground that you're finding, and that
Mm-hmm.
there may be resentment of overstaying or guilt for jumping too early or doing anything that is a little less than respectful,
Yeah.
perhaps, in
Yeah.
emotional reaction.
Yeah.
But I think what you're finding and what I'm hearing with those two stories is you've clearly honored yourself
Yes.
while not dishonoring them.
Yeah, exactly. And I was looking at my notes and something I had written down. Truth plus boundaries equals integrity equals self-respect, and self-respect does not have to equal a loss of love. And so, in those examples,
Wow.
maintained my boundary, maintained integrity, my own self-respect, but it didn't have to mean the loss of that relationship or the loss of um just the way that we were able to be together, and so it wasn't negative. And
I actually would potentially submit
hmm
it might mean an increase of the love,
yeah,
because I imagine when they see you show up with self-respect and they know that you're honoring them and not disrespect, that you're not doing this in an energy of disrespect.
yeah,
I think that in these situations, it seems what I can sense is there's only now a new increase of like appreciation, respect, and love for you. I mean,
yeah,
like, and
great,
it reminds me of the weird thing that occurs in the world that we all have talked about so much in business, where you take it more seriously when you're paying more money for it. It's like the higher the boundary or the self-respect, when you show up with that, there's the response in kind to some degree. Like that I value myself and they value me as well thing.
sure, for sure. And that's exactly how I felt in both of those interchanges. But again, like I said, old Jennifer probably would maybe have skirted a topic that I was afraid would, hurt their feelings if I had a different opinion, or they would see me poorly. And in this conversation, this client conversation, I had played the conversation in my mind several times when I was in a state of resentment, and the words were very different than the conversation we had, where I had really processed this and was able to come to it from a place, because I care about you, we're going to have a conversation that is going to be honest and kind, right? And has some boundaries in it, right? And so it was a very different conversation than the one I had been rehearsing in my mind prior to processing this.
Sounds like that's also the part of the process too.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
like a part of the stages of grief to some degree that you've
Yeah,
identify.
yeah, you're right. That anger, that area of anger.
And blame. Yeah. And like, it's okay to
Right.
go through it.
Yes, yeah, you're absolutely right. Because I for sure had been through all of that with them, right? All of those feelings and just finally got to that acceptance place. I was able
Yes.
to have a calm, rational conversation.
So I feel like you've added a lot more to the excellent feedback your friend called with.
It was really unlocked some thinking for me though. And yeah, she's sharing this specific example, but certainly took a moment to go deeper with this and think about this recurring pattern and that I want it to be different go forward. And so I'm responsible for noticing and choosing something different, right? That's the lesson that I'm taking from it.
Yes. And you've found something even beyond and within and beyond what was shared by your friend, like the option of respect and clarity that's right on top of the boundary rather than guilt and resentment on either side of it.
Yeah, exactly. At the positive.
Yeah. And then the identification around the cycle of grief, I think is actually quite key because that gives you I think that grants us as humans room for the range of emotion without feeling like there's something wrong with us.
100%. When I'm talking to somebody who I know they're in it, I will tell them, give yourself grace to go ahead and be angry or be sad. That's a normal
Yeah.
process and it's okay for you to feel like that right now and just recognize that's what's happening and that someday you want to get to this acceptance phase and what can you do to help yourself get there, right? On the time frame that you're ready to.
And then waiting to address it if possible until we get to the acceptance phase.
Yeah. 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 When possible, right? Sometimes it's not. Yeah.
You've already digested and moved forward in a new way with something so freshly recognized as of like 2 months ago. Metabolized is the right word. Like you're moving forward with a new energy.
Yes, for sure. Like I said, I've just kind of thought through what are the steps I need to take when I'm getting these warning signals. And instead of just trying to address the symptom, I need to pause, reflect what's really going on here, what's really at the root of this. And, is there some kind of a boundary or unmet that I am not acknowledging because I keep thinking I'm going to fix it in hero mode, right? And addressing these symptoms. So I just making sure I'm getting real with myself when I begin to feel that.
And any reflections on that, like that triad,
Yeah.
based on all of the new things you've learned and the awarenesses you've gained over the past few months?
Hmm.
Where does that leave you, hero or otherwise?
Yeah. Well, I've been a lifelong hero, right? Person that comes in to rescue, whether it's my kids or whatever it else. And I have learned through those experiences that I need to practice being the coach. So recognizing when I'm doing that and
Yeah.
the difference between the hero and the coach, right? The hero says, I'm here to do this because you can't do it yourself. The coach says, I believe in you. I'm here to support you. You can do it. And those are the two uh, alter egos there. And so I have a tendency, right, throughout my life when big scary things happen, I can go right into hero mode. And I guess I just have enough experience in hindsight to recognize that doesn't work. It fixes the moment, but ultimately you will then process through the entire drama triangle, which you become the persecutor and then you become the victim. So you have to see that and acknowledge that, if that's your tendency. So people usually know the one that they gravitate to, and for me it's the hero mode. And so yeah, I gotta observe that all of this is just interwoven.
Add a reflection to the soup with a different framework that has a similar wording.
Please do.
What you just shared makes me think of is when I hear you say hero, I working in stories do a lot with the hero's journey framework. And what you've done though is you've been through the hero's journey yourself probably several times. And when you say coach, who you're showing up as is the mentor. Like you're showing up as Gandalf to Frodo or Obi-Wan Kenobi to Skywalker or Glenda to Dorothy. You're showing up as the mentor who's been through the journey before and guides, but does not do before.
Correct. Yeah. And the other key is you have to release their decision in terms of you have to let go of them doing what you wanted them to do or you thought they should do or whatever it is. You're there to guide and then they have to make the decision and walk forward. And that's the key of being the mentor or the coach, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's a powerful place to find yourself in. It's a change of archetypes.
it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Like I said, 53 years, 7 months. I'm going to figure this out.
I love that you're counting the months. Like, developmental stages here. Words. How would you summarize the moral of the story? What is the wisdom gained in clarity now?
If I were to maybe summarize it, loving on myself and meeting my needs means I can also love on others and in a way that is honest and beneficial for them. And so it is me wanting to live into my own self-worth as measured by me and wanting to, live the EOS life, so to speak, right? Doing what I love with people that I love. And if that's not true, what am I doing to take responsibility for that? And so just really being able to reflect on that and recognize that my worth is in me honoring that. And when I do that, I will also honor others.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of what I received from your story is that the showing up in that love, in responsibility and love for yourself. It's like a net benefit, actually. Like the twist and the confusion we have from prior chapters, so many of us have, is like, if I do this, it's a negative for me and them. But then the interesting truth you're finding is it's a positive for you and them.
Yeah, it's an and, not an or.
Yeah. So wonderful. And especially that this is such a recent new piece of wisdom and how much, again, you've metabolized it in just a few months.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and obviously I've processed all those other prior experiences and I've done a lot of work to understand who I am, but just this framework and the way of thinking and recognizing the repeating pattern, I think was what the real epiphany for me was here.
Yes.
And equipping myself with some tools to do this differently, right? It's time to live life on my terms.
Yeah.
And so I think that, just the looking at it with a big picture perspective and lens, I think was what, really was the aha for me through this conversation and reflection.
And then my aha getting to listen to you is getting to watch you go do it, even just those two examples you shared and finding the third path.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's pretty remarkable.
It is. Yes. And remembering that, bringing that wisdom with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa, Jennifer, thank you. I need this. So many of us need this. Listener, I hope your mind is blown.
We all do, right? We're all out there doing the thing and wondering that if we're alone and we're not.
Very true. Thank you for this. This was such a delightful conversation, and I'm so impressed by what you've done with this just over the past few months. It's really remarkable and exciting and genuine.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope somebody else can hear this and recognize some of that in themselves and maybe it opens up something for them.
I am sure that's the case. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for listening, and very much look forward to reading your chapter in the book, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you. Me too. I look forward to reading all of those wise women chapters. So much
really fun. Yep. Thank you for listening, everyone. Till next time. Thank you for listening to the Wise Women podcast. You can find the book, Wisdom's Discovery, Finding Your Center at the Edge, on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com. And keep listening to the wisdom that your life is offering you.